The morning sun cast long shadows across forward operating Base Falcon as Corporal Rachel Ward adjusted the worn strap of her canvas toolkit. She preferred the early shift when the desert air was still cool and most soldiers were just stumbling toward the mess hall for their first cup of coffee. Rachel had earned a reputation over her 18 months at Falcon for two things: fixing communication problems faster than anyone else in her unit, and doing it without much conversation. While other soldiers complained about the isolation, the heat, or the monotony of desert life, Rachel found comfort in the predictable world of circuits and frequencies. Wires didn't lie to you. Radios didn't play politics. When something was broken, you diagnosed the problem and fixed it. Simple. "Ward, grab your kit," Sergeant Mike Torres called from behind his bank of communication consoles. His voice carried the tired edge of someone who had been monitoring overnight radio traffic. "South roof antenna is spitting static into the command channel again." Rachel nodded, already calculating the likely causes in her mind. The rooftop communication arrays took a beating from the constant desert wind, and the southern dish had been problematic for weeks. She gathered her tools methodically, each piece fitting into its designated spot in the canvas roll. Her fellow technicians often joked that she treated her equipment better than most people treated their families. "Probably just needs realignment," Torres added, not looking up from his screens. "Wind knocked it off axis again last night." By the time Rachel reached the steel ladder leading to the 3-story outpost building's roof, the base was coming alive around her. The distant sound of morning exercises echoed from the training yard, and the familiar hum of generators provided a constant background noise. She climbed steadily, her boots finding each rung with practiced ease. The rooftop was a different world. Up here, above the concrete walls and razor wire, you could see for miles across the desert landscape. The communication array dominated the space, a collection of dishes and towers pointing toward various horizons. The southern dish, usually a steady sentinel aimed at a relay station 30 miles away, was indeed tilted slightly off its normal position. Rachel knelt beside the base mounting, her practiced eye immediately spotting the loose coupling that had allowed the wind to push the heavy dish out of alignment. She connected her diagnostic equipment and tapped into the communication line, her earpiece immediately filling with the harsh static that had been disrupting morning briefings. "Control, this is Ward on site at South Array," she radioed to the communication center below. "Beginning diagnostics." Torres's voice crackled back through her radio. "Copy that. Take your time. It's probably the same coupling issue we had last month." But as Rachel worked, something felt different. The static wasn't random wind noise or loose connections. There was a pattern to it, a rhythm that suggested signal interference rather than mechanical failure. She had developed an ear for these things over months of troubleshooting, and this didn't match any of the usual problems. She stripped away the protective panel covering the dish's internal components, her gloved fingers moving with the confidence that came from hundreds of similar repairs. The coupling looked secure. The frequency modulator showed no visible damage. She made a minor adjustment to the fine-tuning dial, and the static began to fade. That's when she heard the voices. At first, she thought it might be chatter from another American unit operating on a nearby frequency. Radio signals could bounce and interfere in unexpected ways, especially in the morning when atmospheric conditions were changing. But as she listened more carefully, her blood began to run cold. The voices were speaking English, but with accents she recognized from intelligence briefings. The cadence and pronunciation were distinctive, the same patterns she had heard in training recordings of intercepted enemy communications. "Convoy enters kill zone at 0730 hours, one voice said clearly. "Roadblock already in position." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She glanced at her watch and felt her heart rate spike. 7:30 was less than 2 hours away. She quickly checked the frequency display on her equipment, confirming what she already suspected. This wasn't a normal communication bleed-over. The dish's misalignment had somehow allowed it to pick up an enemy transmission that was never meant to reach American ears. Primary target, Eagle Convoy, the voice continued. Secondary objective, neutralize high-value officer. Designation Ironhand. Rachel didn't need to check any roster to know that Ironhand was Colonel Marcus Bradley, the sector commander. She had seen him just yesterday during the morning briefing, discussing planned supply runs and personnel rotations. According to the duty board, he was scheduled to inspect the Eagle Convoy route that very morning. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her field notebook and began scribbling every detail she could capture. Grid coordinates, timing, tactical positions. The enemy was laying out their entire ambush plan, believing their communications were secure. A shadow fell across her work, and she spun around, her heart hammering. Sergeant Kevin Parker from the watchtower was leaning over the roof's edge, looking down at her with mild curiosity. "Ward, what's taking so long up there?" Parker called. "Control said it was just wind damage. Realign the dish and get down here." Rachel's mind raced. If she told Parker what she had heard, military protocol would require the information to pass through at least 2 levels of command before reaching Colonel Bradley. By then, the Eagle Convoy would already be rolling toward the ambush site. Men would die while forms were being filled out and procedures were being followed. "Almost finished," she called back, forcing her voice to sound steady and routine. "Just need to check the coupling one more time." The enemy voices continued in her earpiece, now providing specific grid coordinates for their ambush positions. Rachel recognized one of the locations from area maps, a supply road that wound through Carvick Pass, a narrow canyon that would be perfect for trapping vehicles. She could hear what sounded like laughter in the background of the transmission. She made a decision that would change everything. Instead of properly realigning the dish, she left it in its current position, just misaligned enough to continue receiving the enemy frequency. She closed the access panel and gathered her tools, her movements deliberate and calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. As she climbed down from the roof, Parker frowned at her from his watchtower. "Position. You didn't realign it," he observed. "Need to check the south junction first," Rachel lied smoothly. "Might be an issue with the main feed line." But she wasn't heading to any junction. She was walking straight toward the command wing, where Colonel Bradley would be preparing for his morning duties. The problem was simple. Bradley didn't know her from any other enlisted soldier on the base. She was just another face in the communication section, invisible and insignificant. The only way to reach him in time would be to bypass every level of military protocol, every chain of command procedure that had been drilled into her since basic training. If she was wrong about what she had heard, she would be facing a court-martial before sunset. As she walked across the base toward the command building, her earpiece crackled again with more enemy chatter. "Confirm armor in position by 0710. All units ready." Rachel tightened her grip on her toolkit. She wasn't just a technician anymore. In the next few minutes, she would either save lives or destroy her career. There was no middle ground, no safe choice. The morning sun climbed higher as she approached the command wing, and somewhere out in the desert, an enemy force was moving into position. Time was running out, and she was the only person who knew what was coming. The command wing of Fob Falcon buzzed with the controlled energy of military efficiency. Radio chatter filled the air. Boots clicked against metal grating, and the smell of strong coffee mixed with desert dust created an atmosphere Rachel had always avoided. She kept her head down as she passed the first security checkpoint, clutching her toolkit like armor against the suspicious glances of soldiers who rarely saw communication technicians in this part of the base. Every instinct screamed at her to burst into Colonel Bradley's office and blurted out everything she had heard. But 18 months of military life had taught her that charging past the chain of command was career suicide. Still, she pressed forward, driven by the mental image of American soldiers driving unknowingly into a death trap. She rounded the corner toward the operations floor when a familiar voice stopped her cold. "Ward, you are not cleared for this sector." Lieutenant Robert Braxton stood blocking her path, his thick-set frame and permanent scowl making him look like a human roadblock. His eyes flicked to the communication patch on her uniform, and his expression soured further. "Communications maintenance," he said with barely concealed disdain. "You're supposed to be on the south roof, fixing the antenna array." Rachel's mind spun, searching for the right words that would get her past this obstacle without triggering more questions. "Sir, I intercepted an unsecured transmission during my repair work. It's urgent." Braxton held up a hand dismissively. "File a signal report and wait for processing." "That's the procedure. Processing." Rachel glanced at the clock mounted on the corridor wall, 6:14 in the morning. If she waited for her report to work its way through the proper channels, the enemy would have their ambush set and ready before her information even left someone's desk. "Lieutenant, with respect, they're planning an ambush on the Eagle convoy," she said, trying to keep desperation out of her voice. "Colonel Bradley needs to know immediately." "And with respect, Corporal, you are way out of line." Braxton's tone turned sharp and threatening. "Unless you have top-secret clearance and verified intelligence credentials, you're not walking into a colonel's office with unconfirmed radio chatter." The dismissal in his voice was absolute. Rachel felt the walls of military bureaucracy closing around her, trapping her with rules and procedures while American soldiers prepared to drive into a kill zone. Her grip on her toolkit tightened until she thought the metal handle might bend. Under the pressure, she retreated, or at least made it appear that way. Back in the corridor, she ducked into a maintenance closet and pulled out her notebook, staring at the coordinates and timing she had scribbled on the rooftop. Every detail was burned into her memory. The enemy's casual confidence, their detailed planning, their certainty that no one was listening. Rachel pulled the compact field radio from her toolkit. Its range was limited, but it might be enough to reach one of the convoy's escort vehicles directly. She tuned to the tactical frequency used by mobile units and keyed the microphone. Static filled her earpiece. Then a burst of routine chatter. "Convoy Eagle, this is Falcon Operations. Departure confirmed for 0700 hours. Her pulse spiked. They were already loading equipment and preparing to move. She switched to the secure tactical band and keyed her microphone again. "Eagle 3, this is Communications 2. Do you copy?" A pause, then a cautious voice. "This is Eagle 3. Identify yourself. Rachel Ward, Corporal, Communications Repair Section. You're heading into a kill zone. Carvick Pass, Northridge. Enemy armor positioning by 0710. I repeat, abort your route." The silence stretched long enough for Rachel to wonder if her transmission had gotten through. Then the voice returned, tense and alert. "Corporal, that's a serious claim. What's your source?" She swallowed hard, knowing how her answer would sound. "Source is me. I intercepted their communications bleeding through our southern array. There's no time for confirmation through headquarters. You need to abort now." Another pause, longer this time. "Copy. Communications 2. Standing by." Rachel had barely enough time to exhale before the closet door was yanked open. Lieutenant Braxton stood there, flanked by 2 military police officers, his face dark with anger. "Corporal Ward, you are hereby detained for breach of protocol and unauthorized transmission," he announced with obvious satisfaction. The MPs moved forward before Rachel could protest, their hands firmly grasping her arms. Her radio clattered to the floor as they pulled her from the closet. You think you can play hero? Braxton sneered, his voice echoing in the narrow corridor. You could have just fed false intelligence directly into a live convoy operation. They're walking into an ambush, Rachel shot back, struggling against the grip on her wrists. If you wait for proper confirmation, they'll be dead. Enough. Braxton snapped. MPs, secure her in detention. We'll sort this out after the convoy returns safely. As they marched her toward the holding cells, Rachel's mind raced with images of the ambush she had heard described in such detail. Somewhere out in the desert, American soldiers were climbing into vehicles, checking their weapons, and preparing for what they thought would be a routine mission. At 6:48, Eagle 3's lead vehicle began its approach toward the canyon. That led to Carvick Pass. Staff Sergeant Tony Martinez scanned the jagged cliffs through his binoculars, following the same security procedures he performed dozens of times before. Then he froze. Tank treads, partially hidden by sand and camouflage. Netting sat in positions exactly matching the coordinates that Crazy Communications Corporal had radioed. His training kicked in immediately. Eagle 1, this is Eagle 3. Hold position. We have confirmed armor in the kill zone. The convoy commander's voice crackled back instantly. Confirmed movement on North Ridge? Martinez adjusted his binoculars and felt his blood chill. Movement confirmed. Multiple positions. Pulling back now. Engines roared as the convoy executed a hard reverse, dust plumes marking their retreat. On the distant ridge, enemy spotters scrambled for their own radios, shouting orders in their native language as their carefully planned ambush fell apart before it could begin. In the holding cell at Phoebe Falcon, Rachel paced like a caged animal, every second feeling like an eternity. She had no way of knowing whether her warning had reached the convoy in time, no way of knowing whether American soldiers were fighting for their lives at that very moment. The cell door opened, and Colonel Marcus Bradley stepped inside. He was smaller than she had expected, but his presence filled the room immediately. His pale blue eyes studied her with the intensity of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions based on incomplete information. Corporal Ward, he said quietly, want to tell me why my convoy just avoided driving into a tank trap? Rachel felt her knees go weak, but Bradley's next words carried both relief and warning. You were right, he continued. You may have just saved 12 lives, including mine. His expression hardened slightly. You also broke about 6 different regulations in the process. If you're going to keep doing that, you better be right every single time. The weight of his words settled over her as she realized that her ordeal was far from over. Somewhere in the desert, an enemy force now knew that someone at Fob Falcon had been listening to their communications, and they would be coming for her. The desert night over FOB Falcon was unusually cool, but Rachel Ward's uniform still clung to her back with nervous perspiration. She stood in the dimly lit operations room, a steaming mug of untouched coffee at her side, while Colonel Marcus Bradley studied the coordinates she had copied during that morning's rooftop intercept. The room hummed with electronic equipment, and the main display screen cast an eerie glow over maps marked with suspected enemy positions. You had no authorization to make that radio call, Bradley said without looking up from the intelligence reports spread across his desk. But you also had no way of knowing those coordinates unless you heard them firsthand. Rachel's jaw tightened. I heard them exactly as I wrote them, sir. Every word. Bradley leaned back in his chair, his weathered face showing the strain of command decisions that affected real lives. You understand that the enemy will now know someone inside Falcon intercepted their communications. You've made yourself visible to them. She hesitated, the full implications of her actions beginning to sink in. They don't know it was me specifically. Bradley's eyes met hers, steady and uncompromising. They will. By the next morning, the paperwork had been processed with military, Efficiency. Corporal Rachel Ward found herself reassigned to a temporary special attachment with signal intercept and field reconnaissance. The change meant more than just a new badge and uniform patch. She would now be listening for enemy communications as her primary duty, hunting for the voices that had tried to kill her fellow soldiers. The communications floor felt different when she returned. Some soldiers nodded with newfound respect as she passed. Others muttered comments about lucky breaks and playing hero. Lieutenant Braxton didn't even attempt to hide his resentment, his scowl deepening whenever their paths crossed at 900 hours. Rachel found herself back on the rooftop, this time with a sophisticated directional array and a two-man security. Detail. She methodically realigned the equipment, scanning frequencies with the patience of someone who understood that information could mean the difference between life and death. The morning intercept work yielded fragments of conversation, garbled transmissions, and routine chatter from various sources. Then, filtering through the static, she heard something that made her blood turn to ice. "Falcon Base has a leak," a deep accented voice said with disturbing calm. Source unknown. Sweep for female communications technician. Blonde, mid-20s. Terminate quietly. Rachel's stomach lurched as she realized they were talking about her. Somehow, the enemy had identified not just that their communications had been compromised, but had gathered enough intelligence to narrow their search to a specific demographic description that fit her perfectly. She quickly scribbled the transmission details, her pulse hammering in her ears. The security detail noticed her sudden tension but said nothing, maintaining their professional vigilance while she continued monitoring. The intercepts continued, revealing more disturbing information. Contact inside Falcon confirmed. Another. Voice reported. Compensation doubled if target taken alive. The word alive clung to her thoughts like a toxic substance. They didn't just want her dead. They wanted to capture her, probably for interrogation about American intelligence capabilities and security procedures. Rachel removed her headset and walked directly to Colonel Bradley's office, bypassing the usual appointment protocols. The gravity of the situation demanded immediate action. Bradley listened to her report without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When she finished, he leaned forward across his desk. "You have two choices," he said bluntly. "Go into protective custody until we can arrange your transfer, or stay operational with enhanced security measures." "I'm not hiding," Rachel replied immediately, the words coming out more forcefully than she had intended. "Then you stay in the fight, but under my conditions," Bradley warned. "You'll carry a sidearm everywhere, maintain constant radio contact, and have armed escorts for any mission outside the main compound. Are we clear?" Rachel nodded, understanding that her life had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a technician fixing broken equipment. She had become a target in an active conflict zone. Bradley signed the orders for her next assignment, an overnight intercept mission from Observation Post Echo, a remote monitoring station located on high ground outside the base perimeter. The position offered excellent reception for long-range communications and perfect isolation for anyone who wanted her alone and vulnerable. That evening, as the desert sun disappeared behind distant mountains, Rachel sat in the small concrete outpost, with her headset on, scanning the airwaves while the horizon became a jagged silhouette against a sky full of stars. The communication dish outside rotated slowly, searching for signals in the vast electronic landscape. Hours passed with routine intercepts, static bursts, fragments of music from distant radio stations, the low thrum of helicopter rotors in the far distance. Then, cutting through the electronic noise, she heard voices that made her heart race. "Target will be at Echo Post until 0400 hours. The familiar accented voice reported. "Approach from South Ridge. No weapons discharge." until inside the perimeter. Rachel's blood ran cold as she realized they weren't just talking about her. They were actively coordinating an attack on her current position. She grabbed her field radio and keyed the emergency frequency. Echo post to Falcon Base. I have. Hostile intent communications. Multiple contacts approaching from South Ridge. She waited for acknowledgement, but only static answered her call. She tried again, adjusting the frequency, but the radio remained dead. Her eyes flicked to the desk lamp, which flickered once and then died completely. The power had been cut, isolating her from communication with the main base. From the darkness, outside came the unmistakable crunch of boots on gravel, measured and deliberate. Rachel slipped off her headset and drew the pistol from her duty holster, its weight both reassuring and terrifying in her hand. She moved to the narrow observation window, peering into the night toward the ridgeline where she had been told the approach would come. Shadows moved against the darker shadows of the desert landscape. 3 figures, possibly 4, one clearly carrying a suppressed rifle. They were taking their time, confident that their target was trapped and helpless. Rachel's mind raced through her limited options. She could remain in the observation post and try to defend a position with limited ammunition and no backup communication. Or she could slip out through the back exit and attempt to evade capture in the open desert, where her chances of survival would depend entirely on her ability to remain hidden until dawn. Then, drifting through the desert wind, came a voice that was disturbingly close and filled with mock courtesy. "Corporal Ward, you've been listening to the wrong people." The sound of her name spoken by an enemy soldier sent a chill down her spine. They knew exactly who she was and where she was. This wasn't a random attack or a case of mistaken identity. This was a deliberate assassination attempt, planned and coordinated by people who wanted her silenced permanently. Rachel checked her weapon one final time and prepared for the fight of her life. The air inside observation post Echo felt suffocating as Rachel crouched behind the communications desk, her pistol steady in her grip. The voice outside had fallen silent, but she could hear movement in the darkness. Boots on sand, the faint scrape of metal against stone, whispered commands in a language she couldn't understand but recognized from intelligence briefings. Her eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she could make out the basic layout of her defensive position. The concrete outpost was small, maybe 12 feet square, with thick walls designed to withstand mortar attacks. There was a main entrance facing north, a narrow back exit to the south, and observation slits cut into the east and west walls. Not ideal for a firefight, but better than being caught in the open desert. The portable communications booster lay dark and useless in the corner, its battery pack apparently severed when the power was cut. Without it, her radio had insufficient range to reach Fob Falcon. She was completely isolated, exactly as the enemy had planned. A sudden impact against the main door made her jump. Someone was testing the entrance, checking to see if it was secured. The heavy steel door, designed to keep out everything from sandstorms to small arms fire, held firm against the initial pressure. Rachel moved to the west observation slit and peered toward the south ridge where the approach had originated. More movement, deliberate and coordinated. These weren't random insurgents or opportunistic attackers. This was a professional operation, planned and executed by people who understood military tactics. The doorframe creaked under increased pressure, followed by the distinctive sound of metal tools working against the locking mechanism. They were attempting to breach the entrance quietly, probably hoping to take her alive, as their radio chatter had suggested. She made a tactical decision that went against every defensive instinct. Instead of waiting to be trapped inside the outpost, she would use their assumption against them. They expected her to remain cornered and frightened, waiting for rescue that wouldn't come. Rachel slipped toward the back exit, moving with the careful silence that months of desert operations had taught her. The south-facing door was smaller and less secure than the main entrance, designed more for emergency evacuation than defense. She eased it open just enough to scan the immediate area. The desert night was surprisingly bright under a canopy of stars, and she could see the rocky outcropping that provided cover between the outpost and the ridgeline. If she could reach those rocks, she might be able to circle around behind her attackers, or at least find a better defensive position with multiple escape routes. The sound of splintering wood told her that the main door was giving way. Rachel slipped through the back exit and immediately dropped to a low crouch, using the outpost's concrete wall as cover while she moved toward the rocky ground. Behind her, she heard the main door crash open, followed by rapid footsteps as at least 2 people entered the small building. Harsh whispers and the sound of equipment being overturned told her they had discovered her. Absence thought she reached the first cluster of rocks just as a beam of tactical light swept the area where she had been hiding. The light moved systematically, searching the immediate perimeter with professional thoroughness. Rachel pressed herself against the cool stone and controlled her breathing, knowing that any movement or sound would give away her position. "Target not in primary location," a voice called softly in accented English. "Expand search pattern." Rachel recognized the voice from the radio intercepts, the same calm, professional tone that had coordinated the morning's failed ambush. These were the same people who had tried to kill Colonel Bradley and the Eagle convoy, and now they were here for her personally. She drew her pistol and checked the tactical light mounted beneath the barrel. 15 rounds in the magazine, 1 in the chamber. Against at least 3 trained attackers with automatic weapons, those 16 bullets would need to count for everything. Movement to her left caught her attention. A shadow separated itself from the ridgeline and began moving toward her position, staying low and using available cover effectively. Whoever these people were, they knew what they were doing. Rachel shifted her position carefully, keeping the rock formation between herself and the searching lights. A new angle gave her a clear view of the outpost's main entrance, where 2 figures stood silhouetted against the interior lighting they had somehow restored. One was tall and lean, carrying what looked like an assault rifle with a sound suppressor. The other was shorter but moved with the fluid grace of someone extremely comfortable with violence. Both wore desert camouflage that didn't match any American or Allied patterns she recognized. The third attacker was still moving through the rocks toward her position, clearly attempting to flank her while his partners maintained pressure from the outpost. It was a textbook military maneuver, executed with the precision of professionals rather than the chaotic aggression of typical insurgent fighters. Rachel made another tactical decision that surprised even herself. Instead of waiting to be surrounded, she moved toward the threat. Using the rocky terrain for concealment, she began working her way toward the flanking attacker's projected path. Her boots made almost no sound on the sandy ground between stone outcroppings, and she kept her movements slow and deliberate to avoid detection. She found her position behind a boulder roughly the size of a small car, with clear sight lines toward both the outpost and the approach route from the ridge. From here, she could engage targets without being caught in a crossfire, and the solid rock would provide protection from return fire. The flanking attacker appeared exactly where she had predicted, moving carefully but not carefully enough. He was maybe 30 yards away, close enough for accurate shooting, but far enough that she wouldn't give away her position immediately after firing. Rachel steadied her pistol against the boulder's surface, lined up her sights, and squeezed the trigger twice in rapid succession. The suppressed rounds made sharp cracks that echoed off the rocks, and the target dropped immediately. Shouts erupted from the outpost area as the remaining attackers realized their tactical situation had changed dramatically. Instead of hunting a trapped and frightened communications technician, they were now dealing with someone who was fighting back effectively. Automatic weapons fire raked the rocks around Rachel's position, forcing her to duck behind cover as high velocity. Rounds sparked off stone inches from her head. The shooting was intense but undisciplined, suggesting that her attackers were more surprised than she had hoped. She waited for a pause in the firing, then moved to a new position among the rocks. Military training emphasized that staying in one place during a firefight was usually fatal, and she had no intention of making herself an easy target. From her new vantage point, she could see one of the remaining attackers advancing toward her last known position, his rifle at the ready. She lined up another shot, but this time he was moving more carefully, using cover effectively and presenting only brief glimpses of target area. Rachel's radio, clipped to her tactical vest, suddenly crackled with static. She had almost forgotten about it during the firefight, but apparently the reduced distance from FOB Falcon was bringing her back into communication range. Any station, this is Echo Post, she whispered into the microphone. Under attack by multiple hostiles. Immediate assistance required. The response was immediate and welcome. Echo Post. This is Falcon Operations. Raven team dispatched. Estimated arrival 6 minutes. Hold your position. 6 minutes felt like an eternity when people were actively trying to kill you. But it was better than the alternative of facing this alone until dawn. Rachel keyed her microphone again. Falcon Operations. Be advised, hostiles are professional military, not typical insurgents. Coordinated tactics and suppressed weapons. Copy. Echo Post. Raven team advised. Stay alive, Ward. The use of her name told her that Colonel Bradley was personally monitoring the situation, and that knowledge gave her the psychological boost she needed to continue fighting. She wasn't forgotten or abandoned. Help was coming. The remaining attackers had apparently heard her radio transmission, because their tactics immediately changed from methodical hunting to rapid assault. They rushed her position from 2 directions simultaneously, firing as they moved in a desperate attempt to eliminate her before American reinforcements arrived. Rachel engaged both targets, her training taking over as conscious thought gave way to muscle memory and practiced reflexes. Her pistol barked repeatedly, the muzzle flashes lighting up the rocky ground around her position. One attacker stumbled and fell, but the other continued his advance, closing the distance to less than 20 yards before Rachel's final shots dropped him as well. Sudden silence fell over the desert, broken only by her ragged breathing and the distant sound of approaching helicopters. The characteristic whoop-whoop of rotor blades grew louder until 2 armed aircraft appeared over the ridgeline, their searchlights turning night into day. Armed soldiers fast roped from the helicopters, their boots hitting the sand in perfect formation as they secured the area around. Observation Post Echo. Rachel remained in her defensive position until she heard familiar American voices calling the all clear. When she finally stood up from behind the boulder, her legs felt unsteady from adrenaline and exhaustion. She had survived a professional assassination attempt through a combination of training, luck, and determination. But as she looked at the 3 bodies scattered across the desert floor, she realized this was only the beginning. Someone had sent these people to kill her, and they would certainly send more. Colonel Marcus Bradley met Rachel at the helicopter landing zone as the rotor wash finally died down, dust settling around them in the pre-dawn darkness. His weathered face showed a mixture of relief and concern as he surveyed the scene that Raven team had secured around Observation Post Echo. "I heard you made quite a mess out there," he said, his tone carrying approval rather than criticism. Rachel handed him the enemy communications equipment she had recovered from the attackers. "They were here specifically for me, sir." This wasn't random. Bradley examined the radio pack, noting its sophisticated design and encryption capabilities. "Professional-grade equipment," he observed. "These weren't typical insurgents." "No, sir, they weren't." Rachel's voice carried the steady confidence of someone who had been tested under fire and not found wanting. They knew my location, my schedule, and my identity. Someone is feeding them intelligence. The colonel studied her for a long moment, seeing something different in the young communications technician who had climbed onto his roof just days earlier to fix a broken antenna. What you did tonight, Ward, that wasn't just about fixing radios anymore. To her surprise, he reached into his tactical vest and withdrew a patch that she didn't immediately recognize. The design showed a stylized raven against a communications tower with text that read, "Raven Team, unseen, unheard, unbroken. Special Operations Signal Intelligence," Bradley explained as he pinned the patch to her uniform. "You've earned a place with some very select people, Corporal. Question is, do you want it?" Rachel looked at the patch, understanding that her life in the military was about to change completely. "What does it mean, sir?" "It means you're done fixing broken antennas," Bradley replied. "From now on, you hunt the people who want to break them." The next few days passed in a blur of briefings, equipment training, and integration with personnel whose names she wasn't cleared to know. Rachel discovered that Raven Team operated in the shadows between regular military operations and classified intelligence work, using technical skills to gather information that conventional forces couldn't access. Her new workspace was located in a secure section of the base that she hadn't even known existed. Banks of sophisticated monitoring equipment lined the walls, and large displays showed real-time intelligence feeds from across the region. It was like stepping into a different war entirely, one fought with information and electronic signals, rather than conventional weapons. Captain Jennifer Lopez, the team leader, was a former Air Force intelligence specialist who had transitioned into signal intercept work after completing advanced training at locations Rachel wasn't cleared to know about. Lopez had the kind of quiet intensity that came from years of high-stakes operations. "Your intercept skills are impressive," Lopez told her during their first formal briefing. "But what happened at Echo Post proves you can handle yourself under direct fire as well. That's a rare combination." The captain activated one of the main display screens, showing a map of the region with various colored markers indicating known and suspected enemy positions. "We've been tracking the group that sent those people after you. They're not local, and they're definitely not working alone." Rachel studied the intelligence data, recognizing some of the communication patterns from her rooftop intercepts. "They have access to our operational schedules and personnel information. That suggests someone inside the base." "Exactly," Lopez confirmed. "Which is why your next assignment is going to be particularly sensitive." The mission briefing revealed that Rachel would be working undercover within the base's own communication section, using her technical access to monitor internal communications for signs of intelligence leaks. It was a delicate operation that required her to investigate her former colleagues without arousing suspicion. "Lieutenant Braxton is already asking questions about your reassignment," Lopez warned. "He's been trying to access your new personnel files and wants to know why you're no longer reporting to him." Rachel remembered Braxton's hostility when she had tried to warn about the convoy ambush, his immediate move to have her detained rather than investigating her claims. "You think he might be involved?" "We think someone with access to duty rosters and mission planning is feeding information to hostile forces," Lopez replied carefully. "Your job is to find out who, without letting them know they're being watched." The investigation work proved more challenging than the technical aspects of signal interception. Rachel had to maintain her normal relationships with fellow communications personnel while secretly monitoring their activities and looking for signs of treasonous behavior. Her cover story was that she had been assigned to special maintenance, duties that required irregular schedules and access to restricted areas. Most of her former colleagues accepted this explanation without question, but she noticed that Braxton seemed particularly interested in her movements around the base. 3 days into the investigation, Rachel made a discovery that changed everything. While reviewing recorded communications from the night of the Echo Post attack, she found a brief transmission on an emergency frequency that had been logged but not properly analyzed. "Package delivered to coordinates as requested," a voice said in clear American English. "Recommend follow-up within 72 hours." The timestamp showed the transmission had occurred exactly 30 minutes before the attack on her position began. Someone on the base had been in direct communication with the enemy forces, providing them with precise intelligence about her location and schedule. Rachel ran voice analysis software on the recording, comparing it against communications logs from base personnel. The results made her stomach clench with betrayal and anger. The voice belonged to someone she had worked alongside for months, someone who had access to operational schedules and personnel assignments. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, the same man who would send her to fix the south roof antenna on that fateful morning, was the traitor who had been feeding information to enemy forces. The revelation explained everything: how the enemy knew about her identity, her schedule, and her location at Echo Post. Torres had been using his position in the communications center to monitor operations and pass intelligence to hostile forces, probably in exchange for money or other considerations. Rachel brought her findings to Captain Lopez immediately, providing both the voice analysis and circumstantial evidence that supported her conclusions. Lopez reviewed the data with the grim efficiency of someone who had seen betrayal before. "This is solid work," Lopez said finally. "But we need more than voice analysis to build a case that will stand up in a military court. We need to catch him in the act." The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Rachel would return to her normal duties in the communications section, but with hidden recording equipment that would capture any treasonous communications Torres might make. Meanwhile, Captain Lopez would feed him false information about a Fachin Lopez would feed him false information about a fictional operation, creating an opportunity for him to betray intelligence that could be traced directly back to him. "The operation is called Desert Falcon," Lopez explained during their planning session. "According to the briefing you'll overhear, it's a high-value target extraction scheduled for tomorrow night. If Torres passes that information to his handlers, we'll have him dead to rights." Rachel felt nervous about confronting someone she had considered a friend and colleague, but the memory of the professional killers who had tried to murder her at Echo Post steeled her resolve. Torres had betrayed not just her, but every American soldier serving at FOB Falcon. The next morning, she returned to the communications center as if nothing had changed. Torres greeted her with his usual casual friendliness, asking about her new assignment and expressing concern about the attack she had survived. "Heard you had quite a night out at Echo Post," he said, his voice carrying what sounded like genuine sympathy. "Must have been terrifying." Rachel forced herself to respond normally while her hidden recording equipment captured every word. "Yeah, it was pretty intense. Just glad the cavalry arrived when they did." Throughout the day, she performed routine maintenance tasks while staying alert for any suspicious behavior from Torres. He seemed nervous, checking his watch frequently and making several brief phone calls during his breaks at 1500 hours. Captain Lopez appeared in the communications center for what appeared to be a routine briefing with Torres about upcoming operations. Rachel positioned herself where she could overhear their conversation while appearing to work on a radio repair. "We've got a sensitive extraction operation tonight," Lopez told Torres in a voice just loud enough for Rachel to hear. "Desert Falcon. High-value target at grid 773449. 0200 hours." Torres nodded and made notes on his duty roster, asking the kinds of questions that a communications supervisor would normally ask about operational support requirements. To anyone watching, it appeared to be a completely routine briefing. But Rachel noticed of something that made her pulse quicken. Torres had written down the grid coordinates incorrectly, transposing two of the numbers in a way that suggested he was already planning to pass the information along to someone else. After Lopez left, Torres waited exactly 30 minutes before taking his scheduled break. Rachel followed him at a discreet distance, using her maintenance duties as cover for moving around the base. Torres walked to a section of the perimeter fence that was partially hidden by equipment storage containers. Rachel positioned herself behind a nearby generator housing where she could observe his actions without being seen. Torres pulled out a small handheld radio, different from any of the standard military equipment she recognized. He extended the antenna and keyed the microphone, speaking quietly into the device. Package tomorrow night. Grid 774-449. 0200 hours. High-value extraction. Rachel's recording equipment captured every word, as Torres provided the enemy with detailed intelligence about a fictional American operation. Even more damning, he had repeated the transposed coordinates exactly as he had written them, proving that his mistake during the briefing had been intentional preparation for this transmission. Torres finished his communication and returned to the communication center, acting as if nothing had happened. Rachel waited several minutes before following, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just witnessed. She had the evidence needed to prove Torres was a traitor, but she also realized that his handlers would now be planning an attack on the fictional Desert Falcon operation. American soldiers might be put at risk if the enemy acted on the false intelligence. When she reported back to Captain Lopez, the team leader smiled grimly. "Don't worry about Desert Falcon," Lopez assured her. The coordinates he passed along point to an empty section of desert where Raven team will be waiting with some very sophisticated surveillance equipment. If his handlers show up, we'll be ready for them. The trap was set, and Staff Sergeant Mike Torres had no idea that his career as a traitor was about to come to a very public and very final end. The pre-dawn hours at FOB Falcon carried an electric tension that Rachel could feel in every breath. Hidden in the shadows of the equipment maintenance area, she checked her recording equipment one final time before the operation that would either vindicate her investigation or expose them all to deadly consequences. Captain Lopez's voice crackled softly through her earpiece. "Raven team in position at grid 774-449. If Torres's handlers take the bait, we'll have them." Rachel acknowledged the transmission and settled into her observation position overlooking the communications center. Through the reinforced windows, she could see Torres at his duty station, monitoring routine radio traffic with the same professional demeanor he had maintained for months, while secretly betraying his fellow soldiers. At 0130 hours. Torres received what appeared to be a routine status update from one of the perimeter watch posts. But Rachel noticed him stiffen slightly as he listened to the transmission, and she saw him glance around the communications center to ensure he wasn't being observed. The recording equipment captured his response. "Copy that. Watch post 7. Maintained standard patrol intervals." But what made Rachel's blood run cold was what happened next. Torres waited exactly 5 minutes, then picked up his personal radio and transmitted a brief message on the same frequency he had used the day before. "Target location confirmed active. Proceed as planned." Rachel realized with growing horror that Torres wasn't just passing intelligence to the enemy about the fictional Desert Falcon operation. He was actively coordinating with them about something happening right now. Something that involved FOB Falcon itself. She keyed her emergency channel. "Raven leader, this is Ward. Torres just transmitted target confirmation on personal radio. This isn't about Desert Falcon. Lopez's response was immediate and tense. Explain. He's coordinating a live operation here at the base. We need to lock down now. The warning came just in time. At 01:45 hours, the first mortar rounds began falling on Phobe Falcon's outer perimeter. The enemy had used Torres's intelligence to plan a direct assault on the base, coordinated with precision that only inside information could provide. Rachel abandoned her covert observation position and ran toward the communications center as alarm sirens began wailing throughout the base. She burst through the entrance to find Torres destroying computer files and burning paper documents in a metal waste basket. "Stop right there, Torres," she ordered, drawing her sidearm. Torres looked up from the burning papers with an expression of cold calculation rather than surprise. "Corporal Ward," he said calmly, "the hero who thinks she can save everyone. Why?" Rachel demanded, keeping her weapon trained on him while the sounds of battle erupted outside. "Why betray your own people?" Torres laughed bitterly. "My own people? You mean the people who passed me over for promotion 3 times? Who treated me like a piece of equipment instead of a human being?" His voice carried years of accumulated resentment. "At least my new employers appreciate what I bring to the table." The base defense systems were responding to the attack, but Rachel could hear that the fighting was intense and coordinated. Through the communications center windows, she could see muzzle flashes and explosions lighting up the desert night. "How many soldiers have died because of your intelligence?" Rachel asked, trying to keep Torres talking while backup forces responded to the assault. "Not nearly enough," Torres replied with chilling indifference. "And after tonight, there'll be a few more." He made a sudden move toward a hidden weapon, but Rachel was ready for him. 2 quick shots dropped Torres to the floor. His betrayal finally ended by the same communication specialist he had tried to have murdered at Echo Post. Rachel immediately took control of the communication center, coordinating defensive responses and calling for reinforcements while the battle raged around Phobe Falcon. Her technical knowledge and familiarity with enemy communication patterns proved invaluable as American forces worked to repel the assault. "All units, this is communications control," she transmitted on the command frequency. "Enemy forces are coordinating on frequency 278.5. Jamming now." Her electronic countermeasures disrupted enemy communications just as their attack was reaching its most dangerous phase, causing confusion and coordination failures that allowed American defenders to gain the upper hand. By 0300 hours, the assault had been repelled, but at a significant cost. 5 American soldiers had been wounded, and substantial damage had been done to base infrastructure. Rachel emerged from the communications center to find Colonel Bradley waiting for her, his expression mixing relief with grim satisfaction. "Torres?" he asked simply. "Dead," Rachel reported, along with his intelligence network. Bradley nodded, looking at the burning documents scattered around the communications center. "We'll need a complete investigation of everything he had access to, every operation he might have compromised." The investigation over the following days revealed the full scope of Torres's betrayal. For over 6 months, he had been providing enemy forces with detailed intelligence about convoy routes, personnel movements, and operational schedules. The attack on Eagle Convoy that Rachel had prevented had been just one of many operations that Torres had supported with inside information. More disturbing was the discovery that Torres had been recruited by a sophisticated intelligence network that had been specifically targeting American military communications personnel. Rachel's interception of their planning had disrupted a much larger operation designed to compromise multiple bases throughout the region. The evidence files filled several storage containers, and the investigation team found connections to other security breaches that had previously been attributed to operational security failures rather than deliberate sabotage. Captain Lopez briefed Rachel on the broader implications during a secure meeting in the Raven team facility. Torres was part of a network that's been operating for over 2 years, Lopez explained. Your work didn't just stop one trader. You uncovered an entire intelligence operation. Rachel felt the weight of that responsibility, understanding that her decision to bypass protocol and warn about the convoy ambush had set in motion a chain of events that exposed threats to American forces across the entire theater of operations. What happens now? She asked. Lopez smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. Now we hunt down the rest of the network, and you're going to help us do it. The patch on Rachel's uniform had changed again, this time to reflect her new status as a full member of Raven Team's counterintelligence operations. But more importantly, she had earned the respect of soldiers throughout FOB Falcon, who now understood that the quiet communications technician had been fighting a different kind of war all along. Late that night, as Rachel performed her new duties, monitoring enemy communications from a secure facility, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that morning, when she had climbed onto the roof to fix a broken antenna. She was no longer invisible or insignificant. She had become a weapon in the war for information, and she was very good at it. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, hiding other enemies and other threats. But for the first time since hearing those enemy voices on her earpiece, Rachel felt ready for whatever came next. The secure briefing room in FOB, Falcon's intelligence wing, buzzed with activity as Rachel studied surveillance photographs spread across the conference table. 3 weeks had passed since Torres's death and the failed assault on the base, but the investigation into his intelligence network had revealed connections that reached far beyond anything she had initially imagined. These aren't random insurgents, Colonel Bradley explained, pointing to facial recognition matches from various databases. This is a coordinated intelligence operation with connections to state-sponsored actors. Captain Lopez activated the main display screen, showing a complex network diagram with dozens of interconnected nodes representing suspected operatives, communication links, and operational cells. Torres was just one piece of a much larger puzzle, she said. And thanks to your work, we're finally seeing the whole picture. Rachel examined the intelligence files, recognizing communication patterns and frequencies from her intercept work. The attack on Echo Post wasn't about eliminating me personally, she realized. They were trying to protect this entire network. Exactly, Bradley confirmed. Your technical skills posed a direct threat to their operational security. They couldn't risk you identifying more of their communication methods. The investigation had revealed that enemy forces had been using a combination of technical infiltration and human intelligence assets to monitor American operations across multiple bases in the region. Torres had been recruited through financial pressure and personal grievances, but he was far from the only compromised individual. We've identified at least 7 other potential assets, Lopez continued, highlighting names on the network diagram. Communications personnel, logistics coordinators, and administrative staff who had access to sensitive operational information. Rachel studied the list, recognizing several names from her daily interactions around the base. The scope of the infiltration was staggering, suggesting a level of planning and resources that indicated serious state-level involvement. The good news, Bradley said, is that we now have the tools to roll up the entire network. The bad news is that we need to do it simultaneously to prevent them from warning each other. The operation they planned was unprecedented in its scope and coordination. Multiple teams would simultaneously arrest suspected assets at bases throughout the region, while technical specialists worked to intercept and disrupt enemy communications networks. Rachel's role would be central to the technical aspects of the operation. Her knowledge of enemy communication methods and frequencies would be crucial for preventing the network from coordinating a response to the arrests. This is bigger than just stopping a few traitors, Lopez explained during their final planning session. If we succeed, we'll have dismantled an intelligence operation that's been responsible for American casualties across the entire theater. The weight of that responsibility settled on Rachel's shoulders as she prepared her equipment for the coordinated strikes. Over the past month, she had evolved from a simple communications technician into a counterintelligence specialist. But this operation would test every skill she had developed. At 0500 hours on the designated morning, Rachel was positioned in the Communications Monitoring Center with arrays of sophisticated jamming and intercept equipment. Her job was to monitor enemy frequencies and prevent any coordination between network members as the arrests began. "Raven Team, this is Control." Bradley's voice came through her earpiece. "Operation Network Down is now active. Begin Phase 1. Across FOB Falcon and 3 other military installations, teams of military police and counterintelligence specialists began simultaneous arrests of suspected network members. Rachel watched her monitoring equipment as enemy communications frequencies erupted with confusion and panic. Multiple arrest operations detected. She heard one voice report in accented English. "Network compromised. Initiate emergency protocols." Rachel immediately began jamming the frequency, but she could see that other communication channels were activating as the enemy network tried to coordinate a response to the unexpected assault on their operations. "Control, this is Ward," she reported. "They're shifting to backup frequencies. I'm tracking 7 active channels." Her fingers moved across the monitoring equipment with practiced efficiency, identifying and disrupting enemy communications faster than they could establish new links. But she could see that some messages were getting through, and she knew that network members who hadn't been arrested yet would be receiving warnings. "Phase 2. Execute now," Bradley ordered over the command channel. The second phase involved electronic warfare specialists at multiple locations, working to completely shut down enemy communications across the entire region. Rachel coordinated their efforts, using her detailed knowledge of network operations to target the most critical communication nodes. The operation continued for over 6 hours, with arrests, electronic warfare, and intelligence gathering proceeding simultaneously across multiple time zones. Rachel's monitoring equipment showed enemy communications degrading steadily as their network lost the ability to coordinate effectively. By early afternoon, the results were clear. 14 suspected assets had been arrested, including 3 high-ranking non-commissioned officers and 2 civilian contractors with access to classified information. Electronic surveillance had identified dozens of communication sites and safe houses, and financial investigations had traced funding sources back to foreign intelligence services. "This is the most significant counterintelligence success we've had in this theater," Colonel Bradley announced during the post-operation briefing. And it started with one communications technician who had the courage to act on what she heard. Rachel felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion as she reviewed the operation's results. The network that had threatened American forces for over 2 years had been effectively dismantled, and the intelligence gathered during the arrests would prevent similar operations from developing. But she also understood that this victory was just one battle in a larger war for information security. Other networks existed, other threats waited to be discovered, and her work with Raven Team was far from finished. Captain Lopez approached her after the briefing concluded. "You've come a long way from fixing broken antennas," she observed with a smile. Rachel nodded, thinking about how much her life had changed since that morning when she had climbed onto the seamed roof and accidentally intercepted enemy communications. "I'm still fixing broken things," she replied. "Just different kinds of problems now." The celebration was brief, however. Late that evening, Rachel's monitoring equipment detected new communications traffic on frequencies she hadn't seen before. The enemy was already adapting, developing new methods and recruiting new assets to replace the network that had been destroyed. "Looks like we're back in business," she told Lopez as she began analyzing the new intercepts. "Good," Lopez replied. "We're just getting started." Outside, the desert night was quiet, but Rachel knew that somewhere in the darkness, new enemies were planning new operations. Her job was to listen for their voices and stop them before they could threaten American lives. She settled back into her monitoring position, headset on, fingers ready to work across banks of sophisticated equipment. The war for information never ended, and she had found her place in that fight. 6 months after Operation Network Down, Rachel Ward sat in a secure conference room at a classified location, briefing a group of military intelligence officers on the lessons learned from her counterintelligence work. The presentation screen behind her displayed network diagrams and communication analysis that had become the foundation for new security protocols across American military operations. "The key insight," she explained to the assembled officers, "is that technical vulnerabilities and human intelligence often work together. You can't effectively counter one without addressing the other." Her audience included colonels and generals from multiple service branches, all seeking to understand how a communications technician's accidental intercept had led to the exposure of the most sophisticated enemy intelligence network discovered in recent years. Colonel Bradley, now serving as her direct supervisor in a newly created counterintelligence unit, provided context for her technical explanations. "Sergeant Ward's work has fundamentally changed how we approach communication security," he told the group. "Our methods are now being implemented at bases throughout the region." Rachel had been promoted twice since the Torres investigation, her rank and responsibilities reflecting her unique combination of technical expertise and operational experience. The quiet technician who had once preferred wires to people now found herself training other specialists and developing new counterintelligence procedures. But more importantly, her work had saved lives. The intelligence network she had helped dismantle had been responsible for at least 37 successful attacks on American forces over 2 years. The convoy ambush she had prevented was just one of many operations that had been stopped because of her willingness to act on information she wasn't supposed to hear. The psychological profile of technical personnel makes them valuable targets for recruitment. She continued her briefing. "They have access to sensitive systems. They often feel undervalued by traditional military hierarchy, and they may not receive adequate counterintelligence training." The presentation included case studies from the Torres investigation, showing how financial pressure and personal grievances had been exploited to turn a trusted communications supervisor into a traitor. The lessons learned had led to enhanced screening procedures and improved support systems for technical personnel. After the briefing concluded, Rachel found herself standing on a rooftop observation deck overlooking the desert landscape. The view reminded her of that first morning when she had climbed up to repair a broken antenna and accidentally changed the course of her entire life. Captain Lopez joined her at the observation rail, both women looking out toward the horizon, where new threats and new challenges waited to be discovered. "Any regrets?" Lopez asked. "You could have stayed in routine communications maintenance, kept your head down, fixed broken equipment, avoided all the complications that came with speaking up." Rachel considered the question seriously. The past months had brought danger, responsibility, and challenges she had never imagined facing. But they had also brought purpose and the knowledge that her work was making a real difference in protecting American soldiers. "No regrets," she said finally. Someone needed to listen. Her words carried the weight of experience gained through months of counterintelligence operations. Rachel had learned that the most important battles weren't always fought with conventional weapons. Sometimes victory came from the quiet work of technical specialists who paid attention to details that others missed. The communication equipment she now operated was far more sophisticated than the simple repair tools she had carried onto that rooftop 6 months earlier. Her responsibilities extended across multiple bases and involved coordination with intelligence agencies she hadn't known existed. But the fundamental principle remained the same: listen carefully, analyze thoroughly, and act decisively when threats were identified. The next generation of threats will be even more sophisticated, Lopez warned. Enemy networks are adapting to our countermeasures, developing new recruitment methods and communication techniques. Rachel nodded, understanding that her success against the Torres network was just the beginning of a much larger conflict. Then we'll adapt too, she replied. We'll listen for their new voices and find new ways to stop them. Below them, FOB. Falcon continued its daily operations with improved security procedures and enhanced awareness of counterintelligence threats. The lessons learned from Rachel's investigation had been implemented across the entire command structure, creating multiple layers of protection against infiltration and sabotage. Her story had become something of a legend among communications personnel throughout the military. The quiet technician who had accidentally intercepted enemy communications and used that information to save lives and expose traitors. But Rachel knew that legends weren't as important as the practical security improvements that had resulted from her work that evening. As she performed her routine monitoring duties in the secure communications facility, Rachel reflected on how much had changed since that morning when static in her earpiece had revealed enemy voices plotting an ambush. She was no longer invisible or overlooked. Her opinions carried weight in high-level security discussions, and her technical expertise was recognized throughout the intelligence community. But she still preferred the quiet work of listening and analyzing to the public recognition that came with her success. The most important victories happened in silence, in darkened rooms where specialists worked to protect their fellow soldiers from threats that most people never knew existed. Her monitoring equipment displayed dozens of frequency bands and communication channels, a complex electronic landscape where enemy voices might emerge at any moment. Rachel adjusted her headset and settled into her chair, ready for another night of listening, for the whispers and signals that could mean the difference between life and death for American forces. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, hiding new enemies and new challenges. But Rachel was no longer the uncertain communications technician who had climbed onto a rooftop to fix a broken antenna. She had become something more dangerous and more important, a professional listener, trained to hear the voices that others missed and equipped to act on what she discovered. The war for information continued, fought in the shadows by specialists whose names would never appear in newspaper headlines. Rachel Ward had found her place in that war, and she was exactly where she belonged. Sometimes the most important heroes were the ones who simply paid attention when everyone else looked away. And sometimes fixing one broken antenna could change everything. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.